The following program is made possible by the Western Riverside Council of Governments, bringing local government together to strengthen Western Riverside County's voice in our region, our state, and our nation. And by Center for Sustainable Suburban Development, conducting and disseminating research on issues of suburban growth and the impact of this growth on social, environmental, and transport systems.
Offering a roadmap to respond to sustainability, to climate change, is a longtime director of Western Riverside Councils of Government, Rick Bishop. Rick.
Thank you, and welcome. Thank you all for attending this important first forum. We really appreciate it. You know, I'm going to kind of dive into a little bit more of a nuts and bolts approach that Western Riverside County has taken to deal with some of the issues that are before us. But, you know, I'm always uncomfortable about terminology. And in fact, I was just having lunch yesterday with Councilmember Laura Roten from the city of Fruita Valley, and we were talking about this conference and terminology and kind of the hypocrisy that exists with some of the things that we're going to talk about. And let me just give you an example. I drove here in a car, right? And if I were to ask how many of you drove here, you know, I'd probably see almost all of you raise your hands, and it kind of makes you feel bad that you're at this conference about sustainability in future cities, and we heard the prior presentations about driving. And I always kind of felt bad about that, and I thought, you know, maybe the way to overcome that is by just changing the nomenclature to make people understand. And most of you, or many of you, probably have a nickname for your car, you know, old Betsy or whatever, you know, it happens to be. And I thought maybe one way to help me get around this is to put a nickname for my car. So I've changed the name of my car to the Bus. That's what I call it, the Bus. So when people ask me how I arrived here, I say I came on the bus, right? And it makes me feel really good about what I'm about to talk about. And so I want you to feel good about this too. I don't want people in the audience to feel bad, you know, when they leave this conference that maybe they're not doing enough or anything like that. So just for a minute, I'd like you all to name the car that you came here on the bus. And so now you can respond when I ask the question, how many of you came here on the bus today? That is fantastic. That's great. We're making good progress. Thank you for your leadership. Appreciate that. So anyways, I'm Rick Bishop. I'm the executive director of WRCOG. We're one of the co-sponsors here. Just in case you don't know about WRCOG, we're a joint powers authority. We're made up of jurisdictions in Western Riverside County, and we also include school district representation, water district representation, tribal representation. And our job basically is to undertake programs at the direction of our leaders, our elected officials, many of whom are in the room here today. And you can kind of see from the list here that it's a real wide, disparate range of responsibilities. We basically do what our members think can and should be done in a cost-effective manner. So rather than creating 18 different approaches to address an issue, perhaps we can do it one time and be cost-effective in that process. And so you can see our activities range from transportation to education to environment to water to economy, so on and so forth. So it's a real fun agency to be part of, and this is really one of our issues. So, you know, why prepare a climate action plan? That's what I'm talking about. We have prepared a sub-regional climate action plan for all of our local jurisdictions, and people ask us why we've done it, and you know, we start getting a little squishy about the term climate action plan because then it goes to, you know, the issue of global warming and do we believe in all that. And we've tried very carefully to put this in context of, you know, in a couple ways. Well, one, as Bill mentioned earlier, there are state regulations that are moving the state towards finding ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so regardless of whether or not you believe in global warming or climate change and whether you believe humans are responsible, we wanted to kind of move past that and say, hey, we do have rules and regulations on the books with SB 375, with AB 32, and it's important that we find ways to comply with that. But let's do so in a way that is also very forward-thinking for an area like Western Riverside County, as it continues to be one of the fastest growing areas in the state, if not the nation. We also wanted to develop a plan that was basically a framework that could showcase things that our jurisdictions are already doing. In other words, take things that are already in place and package them in a manner that we can show that these things are now coming out of the woodwork into the mainstream and be very forward thinking. And so you'll see in our climate action plan that we've created, you know, there are a lot of things in there that you just go, well, these are no-brainers. These are really, you know, quite good measures that we should be pursuing. It's important to note that state law, there isn't a requirement for anybody to prepare a climate action plan, but as we started working with our planning directors and our community development directors in the WRCOG subregion, it became very apparent that this might be a good way to capture some greenhouse gas emissions reductions. They could put it in a plan and they could use it for their benefit. The incentivization of developing a CAP has to do with CEQA streamlining. There are some provisions in CEQA that jurisdictions that have demonstrating reduced greenhouse gas emissions might be able to move through that process a little bit more quickly. I think it was alluded to earlier, and if it wasn't, one of the things that we're increasingly becoming cognizant of is that in the grant field, there is more and more money that is being made available at the federal, state, and regional level that is tied to terms such as sustainability and climate planning and climate response. And so, you know, whether you like it or not, this is where the money is, and if we can find ways to get this money and then be able to articulate and develop plans that are forward-thinking and happen to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, then why not do it? And then there are a number of co-benefits that have been identified for the last several years by members of our executive committee that are important, and I hope you can see those down below. But you know, when you think about climate action plans and the kinds of components that are in our particular plan, there's a number of direct and indirect benefits that come from the kinds of measures that can be in a climate action plan that all start moving toward quality of life. So if you're into solely greenhouse gas emission reductions, this plan has something for you. If you're not into that, but if you're forward thinking about how your community can be best served as future growth occurs, there's all these other things that every one of them I think you would check off and say these are things that we desire for our community. And so when I was talking about the analogy about, you know, naming your car to the bus, that's one of the constraints that we had and that we faced and recognized early on when we developed a climate action plan. We knew ahead of time that if the title itself was going to be a little bit of a hindrance, if not a significant hindrance to the acceptability of the document. And I wish that we didn't have to call it a climate action plan, because quite frankly, I think it would be much more accepted if we were to call it something else, such as an equity improvement plan. Because you'll see that, as Ed was mentioning earlier, many of the things that are in this plan, I think, any community development director, any elected official, and any constituent would probably take a look at each one of the measures that are in our climate action plan, and they would agree that these are things that improve the quality of life or will improve the quality of life in and around their community. And so I sort of, you know, in the context of nomenclature and names, I think that's important. The other reason I think it's important for preparing a climate action plan, and hopefully you're starting to sense this too, is that the people that are in this room here, we're not in the minority any longer with regard to understanding and thinking that greenhouse gas emissions reduction plans and climate action plans are necessary. In fact, I point to a 2014 survey that was conducted by the Public Policy Institute of California. And this survey was regarding Californians and their attitudes concerning the environment. And the survey indicated that a majority of residents say that state government should act right away to reduce greenhouse gas emissions rather than wait until the economy and job situation improves. 65% of Californians say the government should act now to cut emissions, which is up 9 points from the 2013 survey. And interestingly, 59% say that it is very important for the state to pass regulations and spend money now to prepare for global warming's future effects. And I thought that was a pretty interesting study. So when we talk about this stuff, we're not really fringy anymore. This is becoming more and more mainstream. And the constituents, the public and the state, you know, are continuing to kind of elevate this as an issue. So in a way, I think we're not behind the curve in doing this. We're getting ahead of the curve, and I think we're responding in many ways to what constituents are calling for. So here's some things that our climate action plan does not do. This is intended to, you know, kind of ease the mindset of folks that are looking at this as we present it. It's not a mandatory plan at all. It doesn't impose mandatory new requirements. It doesn't replace SCAG's obligations in preparing its regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy. It doesn't replace or call to replace existing regulations or policies affecting new development. It doesn't do any of those kinds of things. Now, when we developed the plan, the one thing we wanted to do, and we always strive to do this at WRCOG, is let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's make sure that we're very cognizant and willing to incorporate good work that has already been done in the local community and by our member agencies. And so when we first started putting together this plan, which by the way was a 3-year effort, and it was funded by the state's Strategic Growth Council, we took a look at what was already out there in the landscape, and we found that a number of jurisdictions had already prepared climate action plans or sustainability plans, or they had many of these kinds of actions and activities in their general plan EIRs, such as the city of Hemet and so on and so forth. So we sort of took a look at that, and then we wanted to plagiarize or copy or incorporate many of the good ideas that they had in their plans into our plan. That was important to do. We also have something called the Western Riverside Energy Leader Partnership, also called RELP, which is a bit of an awkward acronym, but we seem to specialize in awkward acronyms at WRCOG, which by itself is an awkward acronym. And, but basically, that's a partnership we have with Southern California Gas Company, thank you, and Southern California Edison to help local jurisdictions identify ways to improve their own energy efficiency in municipal buildings that they own. And then that sort of served as the baseline for developing the sub-regional climate action plan that we have created. Just a quick idea of, or quick, here's the process that we used to put together over the course of the 3 years: inventorying and forecasting emissions, establishing reduction targets, developing the actual plan, and now we're in the implementation stage and working with our local jurisdictions to move ahead towards adopting the plan. Well, here's the emissions inventory that we created. Basically, the blue line are our current or baseline emissions for each of the 12 jurisdictions that we prepared the plan for. And then you see in red, this is the projected amount of emissions increase that would be occurring through the year 2020 under a business as usual kind of forecast. I wish I could make this really exciting, but I can't, so we'll just kind of move on. What we did was we worked with our planning directors and community development directors to try to figure out, well, what can we do to reduce emissions? And what they decided to do was let's kind of stay aligned with AB 32 and try to find a way to reduce emissions down to prior levels under the baseline. So a 15% reduction below the current baseline emissions was what was strived for in the plan. And then they also wanted to take a look in the long term, and they agreed on a 49% below current levels of emissions by 2035. But this plan focuses on the former emissions reduction goals. So here's what we came up with, and over the course of the 3 years, and this graph is trying to kind of capture how we're going to get there. And you can see that the 15% reduction goal that was set as an objective by the planning directors was actually achieved and exceeded with the emissions and the emission reduction measures that are incorporated in the plan. And it's a mix of transportation measures and energy measures and water measures and solid waste measures. And it also incorporates taking credit for measures that are occurring at the statewide level, regional level, and local level. And I'll give a few examples of that before. So we're really, really pleased that this 3-year effort actually resulted in meeting the objectives that were set initially. And there's no way to talk this up and make it look really cool. The only thing I can think of is that triangle looks a little bit like Steve Carell's prosthetic nose when he played the part of John DuPont in the movie recently. Apparently nobody's seen the movie, so that just sort of flatlined right there. Thank you for coming, appreciate it very much. Have a good evening. But basically this kind of gives you an overview of our baseline. That's the line that goes right across the middle. Business as usual approach, there's the blue line going across thing, that's how much emissions would go up. And then the red line and the kind of mustard color lines are the reductions that are coming from the state, regional, and local measures in order to help us achieve the target. And so that basically is saying we did it. We did what we were striving to do in the plan. We're very proud of that. So here's how we did it. As I mentioned before, there are transportation measures, energy measures, waste, water measures, and other measures. We also divvied them up into 3 pots or buckets: state measures and regional measures and local measures. And state measures taking advantage of the fuel standards and things along those lines. Regional measures, it was mentioned earlier by our chair, Randon Lane, the HERO program, which is a financing tool to allow property owners to implement energy and water efficient measures in their homes or businesses. There's There's significant greenhouse gas emissions that come from that. Our Clean Cities Coalition through WRCOG helps local jurisdictions and school districts to buy at reduced costs alternative fuel vehicles and also implement alternative fuel vehicle infrastructure. There's credit there. And then local measures as well. We're currently undertaking a program in the WRCOG region to work with Southern California Edison to purchase all of the street poles throughout the sub-region and then retrofit them all to LEDs and then administer the contract. So there's huge energy savings and utility savings to the local jurisdictions, and there are also significant greenhouse gas emission reductions that can come from that. So we've tried to kind of categorize all of the state, regional, and local measures and develop a plan that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so when it's all said and done, what do we have? We have over 20 measures. Again, these are all compiled by our Public Works Director, so hopefully there's not any weird, wacky stuff in here that is going to just set off alarms. I don't think so. In fact, when you take a look at the most popular measures, I think that any and every elected official, staffer, constituent would probably say, hey, is increasing the amount of bike parking good for my community? Yes, I don't think that people are going to say no. And I think you can check off every one of these things. Are these things that would improve my community? Are they things that would improve my quality of life? As Ed McMahon said earlier, are these things that would improve the property values of my community? I think every one of the answers to these are yes. And as you see down at the bottom, we get into, well, here's the increased density card. They're waiting to kind of play that last, and they're thrusting this on us. Well, I guess that's one way of looking at it. But when I looked at Ed's slides, I thought, well, we do need to be responsive in the future to the 85 million baby boomers that are probably going to be looking to downsize in the future, and the 80 or 85 million millennials that aren't quite ready to upsize or in their first home upsize. And so there's certainly a market that needs to be created here in Western Riverside County that responds to a pretty significant portion of the demographic. And I think that that's why we included that in there. There certainly are emissions reductions that come along with reduced trip lengths or eliminated trips, but it also is very responsive to improving the community. So every one of these things, if we take out the Climate Action Plan title of this document and call it Equity Improvement Plan, that's exactly what it is. That's exactly where it's going. We developed a tiered approach to this. You probably all know this. A 3-year effort requires a lot of participation, a lot of involvement by a lot of different stakeholders, and so we were very sensitive to the fact that we wanted business and commerce and builders and environmentalists to participate in the plan, and we were fortunate that we were able to do that. And we ended up developing a website that's called Captivate Western Riverside. And you can just Google that and just go straight to the website. In fact, hopefully some of you will do that during the course of the day, during the breaks. And if not, if you don't have a device to do that, we've got some iPads outside, not outdoors, but outside the room here. And you can work with our staff and kind of go through that. And it asks questions, and you can tell us what you think about certain measures. There's probably places where you can tell us off if you want. I guess that's okay too. We'll take all those measures and kind of move them ahead. Our next steps right now is we're working with the local jurisdictions to have them take some action on it. This is not a one-size-fits-all plan, and so we basically developed a plan as a template. Our local jurisdictions are now considering the plan. They can adopt the whole thing and implement all the measures. They can tailor it to fit their needs. They can take things out and move in that direction. But we really love the flexibility that's contained in there. And then one of our next steps also is to move ahead and create a checklist that local jurisdictional staff can use very easily as they review a project. Does it have this? Does it have this? Does it have this? How does it align or not align with the various elements that are in the WRCOG Area Climate Action Plan? So trying to make it practical. I'd be remiss if I did not thank Alexa Washburn, who I see back in the back there, and Jennifer Ward of WRCOG staff. They were really the engines that drove this plan. They're the ones that created the plan. They put a lot of hard work into developing the plan, along with all the community development directors and planning directors in the subregion. So thank you to Alexa and Jennifer and all of the member agency staff that helped put the plan together. So with that, thank you very much.
This program has been made possible by the Western Riverside Council of Governments, bringing local government together to strengthen Western Riverside County's voice in our region, our state, and our nation. And by the Center for Sustainable Suburban Development, conducting and disseminating research on issues of suburban growth and the impact of this growth on social, environmental, and transport systems.